half the time that we see that kind of like corporate language that comes from an artist page or their email list or whatever, the copy's not even good. Like, it's not persuasive at all. It probably won't drive clicks. It's like the blandest, most corporate copy that you could find. It's not good. And like, to me, it's almost like, well, the artist probably could have just done a better job of convincing their fans of this, even if they had no copywriting skills at all.
You are now listening to the Creative Juice podcast, brought to you by IndiePRO.io.
What's up, Indies? Welcome back to Creative Juice. This is episode 238. I'm your host, Jack McCarthy. With me is my co-host, Ed Isola. And we're going to be talking today about your voice, my voice, Ed's voice online when talking to your fans, how to stay authentic when posting on social media, how to stay authentic in emails, and especially how to stay authentic as you're building a team and kind of letting off the reins of maybe writing all of your own copy, maybe, planning out all of your scripts. And we're going to be talking about that in this episode because it's something that I think a lot of artists and bands fall victim to. We've probably all seen things that were like, oh, that doesn't sound like, this person wrote it. And we want to talk about that because there's some pretty simple processes that you can put into your music business to help you overcome that or avoid it altogether.
It's really kind of an interesting thing because I think a lot of artists, as they grow over time, they reach this point where like the number one thing that they can do with their time to keep furthering the band is creating new music, new content, and using that as fuel for the fire, so to speak. I think like this is something I've seen personally where it's like, oh, really? Like when the 502 started, it's like, oh, we're doing all our own copy. We're doing all our own emails. Like we're really doing that and taking the time, and then you start doing some tours and you kind of are getting busy. And so it's like, man, I really need to allocate my time right now to creating new music. And this kind of ties into what we talked about a few weeks ago with Jonah, where it was like, how do you find time? And I think one of the ways it isn't necessarily right is that the first thing to come to artists' minds is let me just be an artist and let me totally offload everything and just essentially anything I was doing that wasn't music related, let me wipe my hands of that and kind of go forward from there. I think a lot of management teams and labels and that kind of stuff would suggest that too. It's like, hey, you make the music, let us focus on everything else. And I think where that becomes difficult is that if you start off early on having this direct to fan kind of conversation and communication, and they'll get used to the way you speak and the way you write and that kind of stuff, and it might never be exactly the same. And so if you totally take your hands off of it, it might start to actually hurt your brand, I think. And so that's kind of the place where I found myself recently, and where I think a lot of artists probably end up is like, how do I continue to be involved? How do I continue to maintain my voice, talk to fans, but also not feel overwhelmed or like I don't have time to make new music or make new videos, because that is what fans want, but they also want to hear from you.
That's a really good point. I think it's helpful to kind of kick off the episode, like you said, with like, why do we offload work? And I think there are two reasons for it. One, which you said, is like, you come to a place where the number one thing that you can be spending your time on is being the creator and focusing as much effort and energy into that. And the second thing, which is probably related in some way, or might be related in some way, is like your time is best spent just leveraged somewhere else. Your dollar per hour, so to speak, is better leveraged making music or being on the road, or whatever else it might be in your business. Or maybe, you're going out into another business venture alongside your artistry and you need to be spending your time there. These are all kind of like big picture reasons that you might want to offload some of that work. And I think now that we've kind of addressed that, it's like, well, what can get lost in the sauce when you do that, specifically around like writing copy and having a voice online and being, I think some artists and bands get ushered into this, like you said, Ed, like early on, especially if they go like a very traditional music business route where they get a manager and maybe they get picked up by a label and signed a deal. And then all of a sudden there's a lot of cooks in the kitchen doing a lot of different things that an artist would usually do themselves or would be starting out doing themselves, it's really easy to get swept up in that. And there are a lot of pitfalls to it.
Yeah, absolutely. And like, I think that that's actually a good observation, because you probably either start off doing all this stuff by yourself and really doing that one-to-one combat with fans, not combat, but, like conversation. And then you hit the problem of like, hey, I've been doing this by myself so long that now I have to change it over, but now it's going to sound very obviously like it's not me. Or you probably just start off with the whole, it doesn't sound like us at all, via working with a team who kind of is speaking for you. I think that has its own set of potential issues, but if that team is having a creative voice for you, they probably can carry it through. So I'm kind of thinking about the fact of like, on the first hand, if you've been doing this yourself and then you're switching over, you got to kind of figure out how you're going to maintain that. And I don't think that offloading that entirely is the answer. Just like Jack said, that's something we've been kind of dealing with, where like for a very, very long time, the six of us have run everything and written everything ourselves. And we're starting to hit a point where like time-wise, that's just not feasible. And so it's a really interesting kind of place where it's like, man, well, we really want to be the ones on our social media, and we really want to be the ones writing our emails. And when we don't, I mean, we were talking before this, Jack's like, yeah, I can tell when like you don't write something, when it's not the way you speak. And as much as people try to imitate it, they may never be that way. And so what we're kind of realizing is, well, we started off by totally offloading everything. And now we're kind of coming back to the like, let us draft it and or QA it and then have other people post it and that kind of stuff. And I think that's kind of a nice middle ground for people that are going to try to navigate that path before we get into like the, what if your team has been doing it since day one.
Yeah, it's interesting. And like, I'm not going to pick at these examples and say that their teams have been doing it since day one, but I just want to pick at like consistency across the board in general. And there are two examples that come to my mind sort of right off the bat here. Actually, yesterday, I saw an ad from the band, the 1975. I dig the 1975. Typically like their brand. It's pretty solid. Their voice online, especially with social media, has always been kind of interesting and very easily recognizable to fans of the band. A lot of like spaced out letters, sometimes words smashed together, a lot of like slashes and characters in the copy, sometimes a lot of capitalization. And I came across an ad in the newsfeed. We were talking about this in our team Slack yesterday, and we came across an ad, and it was a tour ad for an upcoming show that they're doing in, or an upcoming string of shows that they're doing in the UK and in Ireland. And the copy just said, the 1975 at their very best, UK and Ireland tour on sale now. And I saw that and I was like, wow, it's like they didn't even try to sound like the band. And I've seen this happen time and time again with, artists that have large fan bases, major label artists, even independent label artists. I've seen this time and time again where the way that the artist or the band presents themselves online isn't matched up to how they're marketed online with things like advertising, with things like email marketing. And to be totally frank and honest about it, fans can smell that a mile away. They're going to know when they see an ad that had nothing to do with the band. And you can argue with me all you want about whether that's effective or whether it will still be effective or not, or whether people will buy. But I can tell you from a data perspective, we know it to be true. When you write in a voice that is consistent and has obviously all of the elements of strong copy and persuasive argument when it comes to making offers, then you will have a better result. That's just how marketing works. When you speak in a way that, your intended audience will understand and that they'll recognize and see. And we see this so often. My eyes rolled back into my head so far when I saw this ad coming from the 1975, because it was like, they don't write like this. This is not how they present online. I saw one at the holidays last year. I remember telling you about this. It was Dua Lipa. And it was like, the holiday collection from Dua Lipa is here. Like, okay, now Dua Lipa speaks in the third person. Like, if you just take one look at her social media, that's not how it works. It's wild to me, the stuff that you see.
I think that what would be the counter to what you're saying, or like the, maybe not even like a totally valid counter, but it would be like, well, artists should like I said, artists should be just creating, and like this copy isn't really that important, or it's not going to really move the needle one way or the other that much. So just like let it go and let the management team do their thing, or let the label do their thing. That's where I kind of obviously agree with you a little bit more and disagree with that, because it's like, I think that there is a fine line of like, if Dua Lipa, nobody would ever believe that she actually wrote that copy herself, even if she did. But I think that or the 1975, it's like, if they put something down on that ad that sounded like it was coming from first person, people would probably be like, well, I don't think that they did that themselves, even unless that was their brand, because they're so big. But it's like, you can still have your team get a little more creative with it, instead of saying, whatever you said, buy tickets now. Like you said, format it the way that they normally do. Dua Lipa's thing could have been like, what's up, new merch, or however she talks, not like, go buy new Dua Lipa merch. And so that's like the contrast to me, where it almost becomes too commercial. Is that maybe the way to phrase it? Like
corporate.
Yeah, exactly. It becomes too corporate, because a lot of people at labels and stuff like that, they probably have some creative background, but they almost are just super comfortable with like, what is the thing that's going to be the most obvious to drive clicks to this page? Let me say, go buy your merchandise now, versus trying to at least present it in a way that is on brand for the artist. And I think that's where it's like, sure, there probably is a world where like, as you get bigger and bigger and bigger, it becomes harder and harder and harder to have oversight on the ads that are going out for you, the copy that's going out for you, the emails that are going out for you. So I think that presents its own challenges. But I think setting a baseline, this is like a bare minimum, setting a baseline with your team that like, we don't talk like that. We don't talk corporate. We've had a couple.
We don't talk like this.
But no, like for real, like we had a couple people at IndieX who came on, and it was like, here's our guidelines. Like, you can pretty much say whatever you want, but like, we use all lower cases. We don't use full sentences, and no punctuation ever. And it's like, oh, okay. Well, if tickets were on sale, that email says, go grab tickets, not please go purchase your tickets now at this link, right? Like at the bare minimum, you can take the time as an artist to say like, here's my benchmarks. And I think that's kind of like the first suggestion of like,
yeah, these are the rails that you write within. These are my brand voice guidelines.
Right. Like if you're not going to be able to do this yourself or actually have a QA process, it's like, cool. I understand that. I am sympathetic to that as artists get bigger, that I'm realizing like, oh man, like it's very hard to have eyes on everything, and also having eyes on everything kind of actually hurts the business. But giving those brand guidelines is like a step one, I think is a nice way to go about it. And you can check in from time to time and say like, oh, let me review these emails. Did they kind of match up with what I envision? And if not, like have a conversation with the team at that point and like steer in the right direction. Because one thing to be aware of too here is like an artist that as you're growing tries to maintain, I'm actually curious what you think about this, Jack. Like I think that an artist that tries to maintain total control over every aspect of the business down to the copy and down to the social posts, I think that almost becomes restrictive in a sense, where you have to start to trust people and trust people on your team. And like I said, you can check in and have conversations about what maybe could have been done differently. But I think that like these guide rails are a really nice and pretty low effort way. Probably takes 30 minutes to write it, if that.
It's really interesting because there's definitely a fine line here that I think we deal with a lot at the agency. Because you're right. Like, you know, on one hand, you have artists who speak in a very specific way, but they're not really like skilled copywriters. They don't know how to persuasively present an offer to their fans. And that's one tug of war that we have to deal with often. That's like, okay, you have to somewhat divorce the copy for your offer copy in this ad or in this email from how you would always speak to your fans and have no call to action at all. So like that's one tug of war that we have to deal with. And I think that's where having brand voice guidelines are helpful, because it's like, okay, trust us to know how to be persuasive and then work within your framework of how you like to talk. On the flip side, I think there's another side of things where it's like, Yes, I totally agree with you. And I recognize that like some artists just have their, they have their copy being done by their teams, and like it comes off very corporate. And that's because the team is just trying to say like, what's the way to drive the most clicks? Like, okay, we're just going to say like on sale now or out now. But half the time, and this is why I don't agree with that argument, half the time that we see that kind of like corporate language that comes from an artist's page or their email list or whatever, the copy's not even good. Like, it's not persuasive at all. It probably won't drive clicks. It's like the blandest, most corporate copy that you could find. It's not good. And like, to me, it's almost like, well, the artist probably could have just done a better job of convincing their fans of this, even if they had no copywriting skills at all. You know what I mean? Like, those are kind of two different tugs of war that are going on.
Yeah, and I think it's important here to like qualify like what does not good mean, because it's like,
sure,
it's like it's well written, like it's typically cohesive. It's understandable. It is saying like, hey, we're on tour. You can get tickets here. Go buy tickets. Like, there is a streamlined thought. So when I feel like what you're getting at when you're saying not good is like it is not persuasive. It doesn't make people want to be invested. In fact, it probably makes people go a little bit blind to the message, where if the email for tours was like, hey, we're going on tour and we're super excited because A, B, and C, and we're playing our biggest show ever. And like, we just really hope you can come buy a ticket here. I would bet a lot of money that would get a higher click-through rate than an email that says, please come buy tickets for this tour. It starts on Tuesday.
Yes.
And so it's like the message is the same, but there's that touch of personalization, which that's where you have to be really tied in with your team. If they're going to write that for you, they have to know like, well, what show are you excited for on this? Like, what are you looking forward to? What is cool about the tours to you? And a lot of teams will ask those questions for you and work that stuff in there, but that's something to be aware of when it comes to crafting messages and not just being totally hands off. It's like, please incorporate some degree of personalization or, personal experience.
Yeah, totally. And to expand upon that, I think you raise a really good point there. And like, we should kind of speak here about like what qualifies as like good copy, what qualifies as good voice. I would say like your copy should work to get people's attention. It should work to drive interest and then desire, and then get them to take an action. And you do that by all of the ways that you were just talking about, Ed. Tell people why you're excited about the thing that you're excited about. If it's a tour, tell them what's going to be happening on the road. Talk about, what city you're most excited to visit. Talk about one piece of copy or one block of copy that I've often used for shows, especially for like festivals where there's going to be meet and greets and there's going to be behind the scenes stuff going on. And there might be, a special like after party. You can lay out all of those benefits into a section that's like trying to drive desire, to make someone really want to be there. These are the kind of things that you need to think about. How do you drive attention, interest, desire, and action? AIDA. The more that you can do that in your copy, the better. That's a really simple copywriting formula that's been used throughout the ages in copywriting across all different kinds of industries, music included. And if you can do that, that's what qualifies good copy.
Yep. And another little tip too that I've heard in the past, and we're kind of getting into things that are like, hey, how do you maintain your artist voice, but also still drive things forward in a sense of moving people through the email to the sales page to purchase, like not just doing whatever you want and it doesn't work. And you're like, well, what the heck, but a thing that I heard maybe a year or so ago, I can't even remember where, but it was like the copy in each thing is literally just should be intended to get people to click the link or whatever to move to the next step of that system. So
yeah, yep.
And that's like something that I thought was really simple, but I was like, wow, that makes a lot of sense, because if I'm sending an email, I don't need to, if I'm going to make a bundle live, right? I don't need to in the email explain why this bundle is cool and totally in depth. I don't have to go through, here's the things you get and blah, 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 right? Like you don't have to go super, super long form and things. You can send an email that says, hey, we got a new bundle out. It's to celebrate our EP. It's really cool. We've made a special A and a special B and a special C, and like it's all at a limited price. Like click here to see pictures of it and get more info. Like that kind of message where it teases what's in the bundle. People know what to expect, but they're really just going to click on that link if they're interested to learn more about it. And then once they get to the sales page, that's where you drive home the actual sale and like, hey, you get this discount and you get this and that and this and that. And like, here's why these things are cool. That's something I see a lot of artists and teams, I think, make a mistake of is like, there's no clarification on something like that. The email will say, hey, our album's out and we did a new bundle. Click here to get it. You click there. Even the most high intent fans, you click there, it takes you to a standard standalone sales page on Shopify. And then essentially people are just buying if they, one, are a super fan, or two, like the design. There's no persuasion there. And this is just one example, but like that's the kind of thing where as an artist getting with your team and saying like, hey, the email could say this. It's also super important. I'll let you guys kind of word it and I'm willing to help. But that you guys on the sales page, you explain why this is cool. You lay this out like it's cool. And not just put this contains a cotton t-shirt and a
my favorite is it's a super soft blend cotton t-shirt with this logo on it, and that's your sales copy. You raise a really good point here, dude. Like, let's talk about like the purpose of copy and different assets. Is like the purpose of your copy in an ad is to get someone to click on the ad. The purpose in your copy in your email subject line is not to sell the thing that you're trying to sell on the sales page. It's to get somebody to open the email. The email copy in the body is to get someone to click through to the sales page. And then the purpose of the sales page is to get people to be persuaded and see the value in what it is that you're offering them enough that they'll take action and actually make the purchase. Every piece of copy has a purpose. They're not all trying to do the same thing. Like you said, it's trying to get someone from point A to point B, whatever that might be. Not necessarily point A to point Z.
Right, exactly. The subject line thing was a really good point too, of like the point of a subject line is literally just, can I get them to open the email? If so, the email can actually do the click over to the page like you just said. That's like the kind of streamline of it. But you know, we've kind of have gone down a couple different avenues of social media and emails and sales page copy. And all this is to really just kind of, in my mind, hone back in on the point of like, look, there are a lot of different avenues for your voice as an artist to be represented to your fans. Social media, advertising, sales pages, emails, text messages. There's a lot of places where you will be speaking to fans. And I think it's very important and worth having a conversation with your team or with the band. Like if you guys are still running it, like, here's how we want to talk. Here's how things should look. Happy to review things that you need me to, like that kind of thing. But like, have a very clear understanding. So like Jack said earlier, one of the biggest killers for offers and posts and engagement is like a discombobulated voice. You want to have a consistent brand voice where like maybe it doesn't sound exactly the same, but the sentiment's the same. They're not getting super hyped up on email and feeling super excited about how personable this thing is, but then they go to the sales page and it's stone cold corporate, right? Like, just think about where the copy is, and those pretty much what I just outlined, those are the places where you'll see copy, and make sure that like things are looking like they're presented in your voice, because that's more important than I think a lot of people give credit for. And it's very easy to sweep under the rug like, whatever, you know, it's we did good sales, or the ads are doing fine on clicks, or the engagement's fine. It's like, it's important to me, not only for the results that you get in the short term, but the long term of like, people know what to expect when you talk to them. They know how you're going to talk to them. They know like, is this the band that I like? Or like you said, is this the 1975? Very obviously an ad that somebody built for them. They had no clue it's probably even running. That kind of thing.
Yeah, for sure. And I as we kind of wind down this episode, the very simple QA process that you can put into place in your music career. And this is the quality assurance process that we use at IndieX. It's very simple when it comes to things like copy. Whenever we're writing copy for a client, whether it be email copy or ad copy, typically what that looks like is we're drafting copy on, it might be a Google Sheet, it might be a Google Doc, it might be directly into an email, like a broadcast that's drafted out in Drip or in MailChimp or whatever it might be. But when that's done, that's going to another person on the team. And then it's usually going to the artist or their manager or, you know, someone in the band, whoever it might be, that's kind of like the main point of contact. And that way there's kind of like 2 or 3 touch points of quality assurance that make sure, hey, is this good to go? Do we represent things the way that they wanted to be represented? Is the offer clear? Does this all make sense to everyone involved? And does it feel like it fits your brand voice and is coming from you? And if you can follow that process, and most importantly, keep it on a timeline that doesn't hinder you or stop you from making progress, then you're going to be in a really good place. And I know that that sounds like the stupidest, simplest way, but it really is simple. It's not a hard process to follow. If you have a point person that you know will be like, this is the person who, you know, is making sure that everything is unified. This is the great unifier in my business. And if that's you, because you're a one-man band, or maybe that's your drummer, or maybe it's your manager, whoever it might be, you can kind of lean on that person to be the intermediary between you and the rest of your team to make sure that things are good and communicate feedback and changes that need to be made. And that way, everybody who's involved feels good about the final deliverable.
Yeah, agreed. The last thing I will say too is like, it's okay and probably encouraged to lean on your team or your label to figure out what your brand voice is too. If you don't have a lot of clarity and your brand voice is just whatever the heck I feel like saying in the moment, like that's not fair to those people for how you communicate either to your fans. So like take the time to just hash out what your brand voice is and then implement it.
That's well said. I think that's a really, really good kind of final point to be made, is like, if you haven't already taken the time to figure this out and to establish a voice, you should like establish a consistent way of talking to your fans. It will go a long way. People will start getting used to communicating with you online. And like you said, Ed, over the long term, that builds up brand value so that people know, like, this is the person that I like that I'm communicating with. This is the person that I trust. These are the ways that you build up an online presence that is strong and can, you know, withstand time.
Well said. Moral of the story, try to maintain your brand voice as much as possible, because I think it's more important than a lot of people realize.
Hopefully you guys can take some of these processes and just be a little bit more of a careful eye on the way that you are represented online with your team. And that way you can learn how to communicate with them, be fair to everybody, and most importantly, communicate with your fans in a way that's super effective and gets you great results. So we'll catch you guys next time on Creative Juice. Peace out.
Can y'all really feel us? East Coast, feel us, West Coast, feel me.